Hey, South Florida, Dan Grossman here. We are 357 days away from the 2020 election. That's less than a year. And there's a lot to talk about in the weeks between now and then, so we're giving this whole breakdown a makeover of sorts. From breathing life into those dense political topics to taking a deep dive into what matters to you, we're looking at all things politics. Up first this week, young voters. This is the NBC6 Breakdown. If you've been on social media in the last year or two, you've probably seen and listened to one of these young activists. It seems like young people have been part of the national conversation now more than ever, but is that really translating to the polls? The answer is sort of.
Younger voters are just so unreliable, and they're generally not the group that's going to be decisive in an election.
This is Dr. Mike McDonald. He's a political science professor at the University of Florida and has done a bunch of research on voters, particularly young ones. And he says he has seen a pretty big increase in their interest in politics.
We've got polling that shows that interest in voting is at record levels for 2020. We have never seen an electorate engaged this much in modern times. And so Trump is a driving force here.
U.S. Census data backs that up as well. 2014 was an historically bad year for turnout across all ages, but numbers show only 20% of eligible young voters showed up to cast their ballot that year. That changed last year when during the 2018 midterms, that number nearly doubled to 36%. A big increase, yes, but still pretty low when you consider 49% of eligible voters between the ages of 30 and 44 showed up to cast their vote.
We need to see more of a research culture and less of a lobbyist culture to be able to engage the next generation.
David Capelli graduated from UM in 2015 and is part of something called the Miami-Dade County Millennial Board, which tries to bridge that gap between local politicians and millennials like him. He says a big reason millennials don't vote is they don't feel valued.
I think it's really important. A very easy thing to do is our elected officials to have open office hours for millennials and make it accessible on college campuses or different coffee places where millennials tend to go. It's important to invest in the next generation to have millennial initiatives and millennial policies led by millennials. And I think that we deserve a seat at the table on corporate boards, county boards.
We have seen more of that. Just look at Alexandria Cortez. She became the youngest member of Congress when she won her election last year. No, she doesn't represent the view of all millennials, but she did earn a seat at that table, which McDonald says could help erode a negative feedback cycle between young voters and politicians.
Traditionally, candidates don't really speak to younger voters' issues. They know that they don't vote at very high turnout rates, and so candidates don't really cater their messaging to young voters.
Here's a quote. It comes from political commentator James Carville, who famously once said, quote, "Show me a candidate who depends on the youth vote and I'll show you a loser." McDonald says that youth vote could play a bigger role than ever in that election taking place next November. Hey, I'm Dan Grossman, and thanks for being with us this week on The Breakdown.